we're going to add Kibana to that, then we're going to play with the cluster, and just to show you how quickly we can get this done sort of end to end without using any other external tools, running everything locally on my machine. So we need to get started. So we need Minikube, but Minikube has some dependencies, so we're going to need to use VirtualBox. As I said, I'm running this on a MacBook Pro, so obviously I use Brew. So let me start by installing VirtualBox. We'll let that install. We also need the Kubernetes command line utilities, so that's mainly kubectl. Install that. And then we also then need to install Minikube itself. So let's install that when we're finished. So those will just take a second. Right, let's install Minikube. Right, so Minikube's installed. We just need to enter the password here to finish with VirtualBox. Right, so we're good to go with Minikube. Now what I want to talk about is around resources. So when Minikube starts, it'll start a virtual machine and it'll assign resources to that machine, and those resources will be fixed, and that's what you've got to play with in terms of your Kubernetes resources. So it's important that you set those resources correctly. If you've already used Minikube already, they may not be set correctly and you can't change them, so the best thing to do is to delete your Minikube environment using Minikube delete. And then when you start up your Minikube environment, you can specify the resources you need. In this case, I'm going to go with 4 CPUs and 6 gig of memory. So let me run that command and that will start up my Minikube environment. Right, so that's going to take a minute to complete. So I'm going to skip that part and we'll come back when it's finished starting up. It's now all up and running. So the first thing I like to do is to look at the Kubernetes dashboard just to see what's going on, especially for a beginner. So let me copy that. So if we run Minikube dashboard, it will launch the dashboard for us. So we've now got a working Kubernetes environment running locally on my machine. And what we want to do is to go through the tutorial that is online for Elastic Cloud for Kubernetes, quick start. But I'm not going to run through the whole tutorial. What I've done is cut out some key bits just to get you up and running as fast as possible. But if you want to delve into a bit more depth, this is a nice starter, and then it will lead you on to more detail and more complex examples. But it's very nice for getting started. What I've just had to do is tweak some of these examples. So let me show you what I've done. So let's first install the operator itself. So I'm going to use the command from that page to install the operator. There we go, and that's using kubectl, which is the command line utility, and when Minikube starts, it will automatically set up kubectl for you. So you'll see here kubectl is now configured to use Minikube. So this is the main way you'll interact with Kubernetes from the command line. So we've added that operator now. So now we have the operator added, now we can actually start to build a cluster. And so the simple example they start with is a 1-node cluster here. I really wanted to show setting up a 3-node cluster, but for that we need to be very careful with resources. So the default resource is going to be 2 gig, and that's not going to play too well on my laptop. So what I've done is took this as a template, and then I've edited it slightly. So you'll see here we've got 3 nodes in my cluster, and also I've taken the resources and I've tweaked them a bit. So I'm only going to give each node 1 gig of memory and slightly less than 1 CPU. And then I've added a Kibana node in the sort of same vein, taken the example, and I've just tweaked the resources, but pretty straightforward. So now we can actually use those config files to deploy our cluster, and it's as simple as running kubectl apply and then giving it the the config file. So let me take that and let's deploy our cluster. So that's going to deploy our Elasticsearch nodes, and then you can see how this is getting on a couple of ways. So you can do kubectl get Elasticsearch. You can see we've got a deployment called quick start and it's currently red. That's okay, it's just starting up. Or you can go to the dashboard and refresh that and you'll see that it's deploying some pods for us right now. There we go. So now let's also deploy Kibana in the same way, just by specifying a different config file. And again we can do kubectl get Kibana. Obviously still red because we need all of the Elasticsearch nodes to come up. This will take again a few minutes for everything to come up. If I hit refresh here, we'll see things aren't up yet. So again, I'll come back to this video once everything is up and running and green. Green, that took a few minutes to complete, but we didn't really have to do much, just wait for everything to come up nicely. So what's the operator done? It's deployed us 3 nodes, it's set those nodes up correctly in terms of master settings so that the cluster comes up correctly, it's set up security, it's set up TLS, it's set up internal services inside Kubernetes, and it's through that it's been able to link Kibana and the Elastic cluster together, the Elasticsearch cluster. So now we have a working 3-node cluster with Kibana on top we can start to use. But how do we get to Kibana? So there's an internal service inside Kubernetes, but we need a way of getting to that. So one way of doing that is to use the kubectl port forwarding. So what we're going to do is we're going to forward from 5601 to this service, which is the Quick Start Kibana service, which was set up as part of the deployment. So let me take this command and run it. And again, it walks you through this in the tutorial. But now this means I can just go to localhost 5601 and we should get Kibana. There we go, it's looking good. But it's enabled security for us, so how do we log into this cluster? So it's set up, it will have set up a default Elastic user with a password, and that password will be stored as a secret inside Kubernetes. There's a couple of ways of getting that secret, so you can either do it via the command line, and again the tutorial will walk you through this command to get it from the command line, or the other way is to go to the overview and to scroll down to the secrets. So what you need to do is look for the Elastic user secret. So don't see it there, so next page. So Elastic user, quick start Elastic user, and this is our password for our cluster. So let me copy that, we paste it in here, and we're in. So that was pretty straightforward. So now we have a vanilla cluster. What we can start to do is actually play with it. So a very nice way of getting up and running is to use the sample data. So if you click here, there's a range of sample data available, from e-commerce to sample flight data and weblogs. If we take the sample e-commerce data, click here and it'll load that data for you. So it will load, it's a small amount of data, but it's a nice way of getting started. It will give you dashboards and also canvas work pads right out of the box. So it's a nice way to start playing with things. And when the data is loaded, we'll start showing you some of the things that you get for free with that demo data. That will just take a second. Obviously this cluster is fairly short on resources because I'm running so many nodes on my one laptop. So now we can view the data. Click view data, it's going to take us to a dashboard. And this is nice because it gives you an overview of what a nice dashboard can look like, with things like markup, with interactive controls, with a lot of visualization options. But also it's loaded up work pads in Canvas for us. So obviously dashboards are a fairly detailed view. if we expand here, we can go to Canvas. And Canvas is much more of a high-level reporting tool, so think of it a bit like PowerPoint. And what this allows you to do is to build much higher level visualizations for a different audience. So there'll be a sample workpad loaded for us for e-commerce. And again, you can spec these elements as a good way of getting started. So a very different view to a typical dashboard. We can look at some of the other options. So a good place to start is always to enable monitoring on your cluster. So if you come to the monitoring section, you can turn monitoring on here. And this will mean that the Elasticsearch nodes and Kibana will start shipping monitoring data. And then you can actually use Kibana to monitor your stack. This is very, very helpful when you're running, especially in production. So that will just take a second to enable and to start shipping the data. And then we can look through some of the data it provides. So there we go. If you look at something like the overview of Elastic, you can see things like the search latency and the indexing latency, or you can drill down to individual nodes where you look at a resource utilization, for example, by node. Again, you can go to the management section and you can do things like you can look at things like the license management. So in license management, we can see that we're currently under the free basic license. And then if you ever want to try any of the commercial features, you can do that here by starting a 30-day free trial. And then there's several other management sections that we won't go through in this video, but maybe one of the most important is around security. Obviously, you can create users and map them to existing roles, but you can also create your own custom roles. So if you come to roles and create a new role, you can assign specific cluster privileges to this role, grant it access to specific indexes, but you can also map it to Kibana Spaces. And Kibana Spaces is an important feature for segregating your dashboards if you have multiple teams or using Kibana, but for different purposes. So I hope you've enjoyed this overview from complete scratch to installing Minikube and running the Elastic Cloud on Kubernetes operator, to launching your own cluster and starting to play with the data. So I hope you enjoy playing with the